Welcome to the Bible Paladin and our reading of the book of Genesis. Today we'll be reading a couple of stories about Isaac and Rebekah that may seem very familiar to you if you've been studying Genesis up to this point. And then we'll move on to Jacob. The first of these narratives is what is often referred to as one of the sister-wife stories.
Sadly, yes. She is my sister.
Right. And the second is about Beersheba and the dispute over the well. And these are similar to the stories we read in chapters 20 and 21, although those involved Abraham and Sarah. The stories we hear today also involve Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Now, as many of the stories that we've been reading in Genesis, there is more than one way to interpret the text. We can see them as a retelling of the stories mentioned in the previous chapters, but with Isaac and Rebekah instead, which begs the question of who it really happened to. Or we can understand them as a separate account, showing the similarity between father and son and God's steadfast promise despite their weakness. And these stories seem to interrupt the narratives of Esau and Jacob, which will resume immediately following. For this reason, it is difficult sometimes to fit in where this would have taken place chronologically, although it most likely would have occurred before the children were born. And so let's enter into the sacred text as we ask the Lord to bless our reading of these words. There was a famine in the land, distinct from the earlier one that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went down to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, but continue to camp wherever in this land I tell you. Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, in fulfillment of the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and give them all these lands. And in your descendants, all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. This because Abraham obeyed me, keeping my mandate, my commandments, my ordinances, and my instructions." So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked questions about his wife, he answered, "She is my sister." He was afraid if he called her his wife, the men of the place would kill him on account of Rebekah, since she was very beautiful. But when he had been there for a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, happened to look out a window and was surprised to see Isaac fondling his wife Rebekah. He called for Isaac and said, "She must certainly be your wife. How could you have said she is my sister?" Isaac replied, "I thought I might lose my life on her account." "How could you do this to us?" exclaimed Abimelech. "It would have taken very little for one of the men to lie with your wife, and you would have thus brought guilt upon us." Abimelech therefore gave this warning to all his men: "Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall forthwith be put to death." Isaac sowed a crop in that region and reaped 100-fold the same year, since the Lord blessed him. He became richer and richer all the time, until he was very wealthy indeed. He acquired such flocks and herds and so many work animals that the Philistines became envious of him. If you recall, this is actually the third time we hear the story of one of the patriarchs who goes to a foreign land, tells the locals that his wife is his sister, angers the king, and then leaves with many riches. Now, from a purely historical perspective, we can see how this story would have been popular among the people. In fact, it was one that would have been told many times over and over again. And you can imagine maybe at one point when they're telling the story, the narrator says, "And this will happen to your great-great-grandfather," or was it your great-great-great-great-grandfather? And then the story is told again, sometimes with Abraham and Sarah, other times with Isaac and Rebekah. Both traditions continue, and eventually they become two distinct stories, which is what we have in the Hebrew Scriptures. Or perhaps this does happen twice, but the inclusion of Abimelech in both versions makes it a little bit unlikely. And of course, many believers do see this text as it is actually written, and the author does go to lengths to show that it is a different story, particularly from the first with Abraham and Sarah, for God tells them not to go to Egypt. Also, we are reminded of all the promises that God has given through Abraham that will now be bestowed on Isaac and his family. There are also some differences within this story as well. Abimelech does not take Sarah, or Rebekah in this case, to be his concubine, but instead sees them before the fact. And instead of God threatening to punish Abimelech, he threatens his own people, that if any of them will touch either Isaac or Rebekah, they will be punished. And of course, Isaac becomes very rich within this community, and we can see the animosity that begins to develop between him and the Philistines, which brings us to the story about the well. The Philistines had stopped up and filled with dirt all the wells that his father's servants had dug back in the days of his father Abraham. So Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us. You have become far too numerous for us." Isaac left there and made the Wadi Gerar his regular campsite. Isaac reopened the wells which his father's servants had dug back in the days of his father Abraham, and which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham's death. He gave them the same names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the wadi and reached spring water in their well, the shepherds of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's servants, saying, "The water belongs to us." So the well was called Esek, because they had challenged him there. When they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one too, so it was called Sitnah. When he moved on from there, he dug still another well, but over this one they did not quarrel. It was called Rehoboth, because he said, "The Lord has now given us ample room, and we shall flourish in the land." From there, Isaac went up to Beersheba. The same night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. You have no need to fear, since I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So he built an altar there and invoked the Lord by name. After he had pitched his tent there, his servants began to dig a well nearby. Abimelech had meanwhile come to him from Gerar, accompanied by Ahuzath, his counselor, and Phicol, the general of his army. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have driven me away from you?" They answered, "We are convinced that the Lord is with you, and so we propose that there be a sworn agreement between our two sides, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you. You shall not act unkindly toward us, just as we have not molested you, but have always acted kindly toward you and have let you depart in peace. Henceforth the Lord's blessing be upon you." Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning they exchanged oaths. Then Isaac bade them farewell, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and brought him news about the well they had been digging. They told him, "We have reached water." He called it Sheba, hence the name of the city, Beersheba, to this day. Remember Abraham telling Abimelech that he dug the well, and then they swore an oath about it? And now we have the same thing occurring with Abimelech and Isaac. So how do we reconcile these two stories? Well, easy. The author tells us the Philistines went around filling up all of the wells, and so Isaac had to dig them up again. Following this, Abimelech approaches Isaac and brings his general Phicol, just as he did with Abraham, accusing him of stealing their water. Water rights would have been highly disputed during this time when the wells would have been so precious. As with Abraham, Abimelech recognizes that God has blessed Isaac, and he must be powerful indeed, so they make a covenant with each other. This agreement was ratified with a feast, showing once again the connection between a covenant and a meal. As in the previous version, the name Sheba, meaning oath or seven, which you might recall, is where we get the designation of the place, Beersheba. Theologically, both these accounts show how God continues to watch over his people. And just as he had given the promise to Abraham, now he reassures Isaac that that same promise will be fulfilled through him. Isaac acknowledges this, invokes the Lord's name, and again builds an altar at Beersheba, praising God just as his father Abraham did. The narrative shifts again with verse 34, telling us that we're going to be returning to the story of Esau and Isaac. So let's review what we know so far. Esau is the older brother, favored by Isaac, and also by all rights the one who should be given the blessing and the rights of the firstborn. But we also know that God had told Rebekah that that the older brother would serve the younger. And also we heard that when they were younger, Esau sold his birthright to Isaac. So let's see how this story plays out. When Isaac was so old that his eyesight had failed him, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "Son." "Yes, father," he replied. Isaac then said, "As you can see, I am so old that I may now die at any time. Take your gear, therefore, your quiver and bow, and go out into the country to hunt some game for me. With your catch, prepare an appetizing dish for me, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my special blessing before I die." Rebekah had been listening while Isaac was speaking to his son Esau. So when Esau went out into the country to hunt some game for his father, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I overheard your father tell your brother Esau, Bring me some game, and with it prepare an appetizing dish for me to eat, that I may give you my blessing with the Lord's approval before I die. Now, son, listen carefully to what I tell you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids. With these I will prepare an appetizing dish for your father, such as he likes. Then bring it to your father to eat, that he may bless you before he dies. But my brother Esau is a hairy man, said Jacob to his mother Rebekah, and I am smooth-skinned. Suppose my father feels me. He will think I am making sport of him, and I shall bring on myself a curse instead of a blessing. His mother, however, replied, Let any curse against you, son, fall on me. Just do as I say. Go and get me the kids. So Jacob went out and got them and brought them to his mother. And with them she prepared an appetizing dish, such as his father liked. Rebekah then took the best clothes of her older son Esau that she had in the house, and gave them to her younger son Jacob to wear. And with the skins of the kids she covered up his hands and the hairless parts of his neck. Then she handed her son Jacob the appetizing dish and the bread she had prepared. Bringing them to his father, Jacob said, Father. Yes, replied Isaac. Which of my sons are you? Jacob answered his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I did as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your special blessing. But Isaac asked, How did you succeed so quickly, son? He answered, The Lord your God let things turn out well for me. Isaac then said to Jacob, Come closer, son, that I may feel you, and learn whether you really are my son Esau or not. So Jacob moved up closer to his father. When Isaac felt him, he said, Although the voice is Jacob's, the hands are Esau's. He failed to identify him because his hands were hairy, like those of his brother Esau. So in the end, he gave him his blessing. Again he asked him, Are you really my son Esau? Certainly, he replied. Then Isaac said, Serve me your game, son, that I may eat of it and give you my blessing. Jacob served it to him, and Isaac ate. He brought him wine, and he drank. Finally his father Isaac said to him, Come closer, son, and kiss me. As Jacob went up and kissed him, Isaac smelled the fragrance of his clothes. With that he blessed him, saying, Ah, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give to you of the dew of the heavens, and of the fertility of the earth, abundance of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations pay you homage. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. Isaac is obviously unaware of what had occurred between his sons regarding their birthright. He also doesn't know of the prophecy which was given through Rebekah while she was pregnant, and so he assumes that he would be blessing Esau. Now, the story does not justify the actions of Rebekah or Jacob, but rather reports what had occurred. And of course, God still fulfills his promise through Jacob, because God often uses the actions of sinful people to make his promises happen. But let's not rush to judge Jacob too quickly. His actions actually reflect a popular archetype that is often seen in epics and myths, and that is the one of the trickster. Those acquainted with Native American creation stories might be familiar with Raven or Coyote, who also fill this role. They often use their cunning and wit to get what they want, and either help or hinder other aspects of creation. They are not seen as evil, but represent a certain aspect of our own personality, often that which seeks pleasure or fulfillment. They also show that one does not need to rely on strength or violence in order to have victory. Another common theme with tricksters is that many are also shapeshifters, which they use to their advantage.
There was one time when we were children, he transformed himself into a snake.
Yes, a certain trickster has become quite well known in pop culture, and shares many similarities with Jacob. And although his origins in Norse mythology may differ quite from his Marvel counterpart, we still see him as the younger, smarter brother of his more popular and stronger older sibling, just like Esau and Jacob. Now, most Christians, and therefore most Westerners, tend to not favor the tricksters.
You truly think so little of me.
And this, of course, is because of the introduction of another being in the Bible, who we were told was the most cunning creature in all of creation, and who we were first introduced to in the form of a serpent. However, this cunning aspect of Jacob's personality is not always a bad thing, and often it will be used to his advantage. Of course, with tricksters, they are also often on the receiving end of tricks as well, as we will see when his dealings with his uncle Laban later on. But in this particular story, we see that it was really Rebekah's idea, as she pretty much orchestrated the whole thing. So she is not innocent in this either. The story begins with an image of Isaac near death, which is often the setting for the father's final blessing on his children, particularly the firstborn son. The elderly Isaac cannot join his favored son for the hunt, but asks him for his final meal. Upon hearing this, Rebekah devises her plan and brings Jacob in on it. While not actually shape-shifting, Jacob does take on the appearance of his brother in order to fool his dad. As in many stories in the Bible, we are told of the plan and then see it executed in great detail. We see exactly how and why the plan worked, even despite Isaac's suspicion. Once we realize that the guise is succeeding, we come to the blessing itself. Predictably, the blessing contains promises of both the land and of descendants. There's the added prophecy that nations will pay him homage and that he will rule over his brothers. Speaking of brothers, immediately after the blessing, Isaac returns from the hunt. So, let's see what happens as we continue the story. Jacob had scarcely left his father, just after Isaac had finished blessing him, when his brother Esau came back from his hunt. Then he too prepared an appetizing dish with his game, and bringing it to his father, he said, "Please, father, eat some of your son's game, that you may then give me your special blessing." "Who are you?" his father Isaac asked him. "I am Esau," he replied, "your firstborn son." With that, Isaac was seized with a fit of uncontrollable trembling. "Who was it then," he asked, "that hunted game and brought it to me? I finished eating it just before you came, and I blessed him. Now he must remain blessed." On hearing his father's words, Esau burst into loud, bitter sobbing. "Father, bless me too," he begged. When Isaac explained, "Your brother came here by a ruse and carried off your blessing." Esau exclaimed, "He has been well named Jacob. He has now supplanted me twice. First, he took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." Then he pleaded, "Haven't you saved a blessing for me?" Isaac replied, "I have already appointed him your master, and I have assigned to him all my kinsmen as his slaves. Besides, I have enriched him with grain and wine. What, then, can I do for you, my son?" But Esau urged his father, "Have you only that one blessing, father? Bless me too." Isaac, however, made no reply, and Esau wept aloud. Finally, Isaac spoke again and said to him, "Ah, far from the fertile earth shall be your dwelling, far from the dew of the heavens above. By your sword shall you live, and your brother you shall serve. But when you become restive, you shall throw off his yoke from your neck." Esau bore Jacob a grudge because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "When the time of mourning for my father comes, I will kill my brother Jacob." When Rebekah got news of what her older son Esau had in mind, she called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Listen, your brother Esau intends to settle accounts with you by killing you. Therefore, son, do what I tell you. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you did to him. Then I will send for you and bring you back. Must I lose both of you in a single day?" Throughout Genesis, we have seen the efficacy of blessings and curses, particularly of those given by a father to their children. We have seen how God blesses Abel, but curses Cain. Noah curses Canaan, but blesses Shem and Japheth. Abraham is blessed by God numerous times, and he in turn blesses Isaac. Rebekah is also blessed by her family before marrying Isaac. These blessings, whether they come from man or God, are almost interchangeable. Like in the tradition of the prophets that we will see later in the Hebrew scriptures, we see that God is essentially speaking through the ones who are doing the blessing. It's not that it is magic, but rather it's because God has already spoken those words. He's just doing it through his agent, in this case through the patriarchs. And so when Esau does ask for another blessing, Isaac hesitates because he doesn't know what God has in store for Esau. In fact, we can think about the blessing that Abraham gave Ishmael, which was more of a curse than a blessing. And this, of course, is exactly what the blessing looked like, which was that Esau would not live in the promised land, and that he or his descendants would end up serving those of his brother. So based on this blessing/curse, Esau is understandably upset by this turn of events and focuses his anger on his brother. Just as we saw the similarities between these siblings of Cain and Abel, Esau plans to murder his brother Jacob. Although out of respect for their father, he will wait until Isaac passes before doing so. Now, of course, a mother always knows what's going on with her children, so she warns Jacob of Esau's plan and decides to send him away back to her brother's home in Haran. It has been noted that perhaps Rebekah is punished for putting this plan together, because after this, she will never see her beloved son, Jacob, again. When she says she cannot bear to lose both sons in a single day, she is once again shown as a prophetess, because that is exactly what happens. The story of Esau and Jacob is a challenging one. Told in isolation, it would be easy to condemn Jacob, particularly for deceiving his blind father. And whether we take these stories by themselves or in the broader context of their history, they were still sinful actions. Just as the sister-wife stories show the deceit of his parents and grandparents, it is worth reflecting on the bad decisions, even those of our heroes. And yet in the broader context, we can also appreciate that God has a greater plan that cannot be seen by the individuals in these narratives. Jacob will become the father of many children, who will become the nation of Israel. How he gets there is part of his and his family's history. It may be in fashion today to try and remove certain stories or even certain people from history because of any number of bad decisions that they have made. And some are assuredly not worthy of our adoration, but they still remain part of our history. However, with Jacob, God does continue to use him to fulfill the promise that he made to Abraham, and the Lord will even use his cunning to help him along. Jacob's gift causes him to wrestle and struggle with God, but can also be an asset if used for good. Like with Abraham, we may indeed see Jacob's growth as his story continues, which is a hopeful thought for us as well. When we look at our own lives, no doubt we have moments that we are not proud of. Sometimes they may have benefited us in the moment. Other times they may come back to haunt us. But we are more than those moments or decisions that make up our lives. We are much more than that. The Lord is always there to resume or begin the walk that we are meant to have with him. God gives each of us unique gifts and talents and various degrees of strength, intelligence, wisdom, or skills. We then choose how to use those gifts, whether for ourselves or for the glory of God. And then we might see the plan that God has for us begin to unfold. Thank you so much for sticking with me as we have explored these vibrant stories from the book of Genesis. And please join me next time as we continue to follow Jacob on his journey. Until then, trust in God and do good.